here, developer relations at Edge and Node. Welcome to another episode of Graph Builders Office Hours. Today we are joined by senior software engineer John Swanson. John Swanson's been working with Edge and Node for a while now. He's been building AMP pretty much from day one, from what I understand. And
Mhm.
so now he is here and sharing his experiences building AMP. Welcome, John. How you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thanks for the intro. And yeah, that's true. I've the only thing I've worked on here has been AMP, and it's been great. Yeah.
Yeah, you are the OGest of OG. You really can tell the story of AMP from the very beginning. Let's go ahead and back up real quick before we get into AMP and before we get into just details of what you've been working on for a good amount of time. Tell us about yourself. How did you get into computer science? How did you get into coding? And what
Yeah.
brought you eventually to Edge and Node?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's a kind of an interesting track, I think. It's a little bit different. I started off as an architect, like not a
Oh.
software architect, but like for buildings. I went to
Mm.
Carnegie Mellon University, where I studied architecture. However, while I was there, I took some Java classes. So there was a
Mm.
few sort of Java, like essentially like runtimes and certain things where you can do some pretty cool stuff there. And then I
Hmm.
also took some classes where I learned Grasshopper, which is like kind of like a node-based uh, programming language to sort of make generative designs using kind of like a node-based IDE. So that kind of, I think, like put that bug into my head. I always thought I was going to be like
Mm.
a creative or an artist.
Mm.
So I started working. I worked as a project architect in Southern California for about 5 years. This is where I live,
Mm.
down in San Diego. And so I worked on a lot of restaurants and a couple of hotel projects. And then over the course of those 5 years, I kind of was getting deeper and deeper into software. I kind of say like the first language that really kind of got me hooked in terms of like, oh, I can make things that solve my problems was Lisp.
Mm.
It was Auto Lisp, which I think
Okay.
is kind of a really funny, very esoteric language nowadays. Um, but in those days, I think Python was still version 2, and so this was a while back.
Mm.
But I kind of more I was sort of creating these kinds of scripts that were kind of doing drawings for me, making my life easier with, doing AutoCAD, putting together,
Mm.
schedules or things like, oh, we need, how much paint do we need, or how many, board feet do we need of something. So, it was really cool creating those kinds of tools and kind of solving those problems. And I realized I was having more fun doing that than I was doing like the nitty gritty of, project architecting, which is, a lot of driving, a lot of arguing with, planning departments, and a lot of, trips to the construction site, on Christmas Eve and things like that. So I was like, oh, I like this better, I think. And so,
Yeah,
yeah,
I'd imagine going from architecture that internally you've had the uh, the real the dharma, if you will, to just find shapes and put them into better shapes,
yeah,
and that's very much what is it's engineering as a whole. It feels
absolutely.
like it
Yeah.
fits either way.
Yeah.
The journey. Was there a moment you realized, or was it over like a year-long period that you realized that the computer science world of engineering is more fit for you as opposed to the physics world of engineering?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'd say there was one project that I was working on where we needed to figure out like what we could do with like these little river stones that we were going to create a floor with. We had a bunch, we knew them by weight, but we didn't know what was possible. So I wrote a script for like, these kinds of patterns on the floor. And that was that sort of realization where I was like, oh, this side of it is way really more. I had way more fun doing that kind
Mm.
of like checker. There's like, is this possible versus the actual artistic design stuff, or as well as the more physical side of it, where it's like, making sure that, I'm sourcing the right stones and, getting all that sort of things, make sure everything's within spec and code. Uh, and so, yeah, I think that was, I think, like the biggest moment for me, where I was like, this is really cool, because it was software that I thought was kind of creating something beautiful. and it was something that I was like, this was
Hmm.
the most, out of everything I did, that was the most fun part. And
Cool.
yes, that was kind of the thing. I was like, I think this is the bug I want to do. And then it was like shortly after that, I started working part-time as a data engineer. And then
Mm,
that eventually morphed into software engineering. So
there
yeah.
you go. And what was your first thought of blockchain when you first stumbled upon it?
Yeah, so my first thought about blockchain, actually, so I was at Carnegie Mellon in 2009, 10, 11, so on. And that it was Bitcoin was a huge deal back in those days. A lot of people were doing mostly nefarious things, I'd say, with it. But because there was not that much. I think that was, this is back when, like, it was like the Magic the Gathering exchange was the only place where you can really
Yeah,
do anything, or at least that's kind of all I knew about it. But I remember,
buy a pizza.
yeah, exactly, right? Yeah, like buy pizza. I have had a Bitcoin pizza. So yeah, it was kind of like those days. Yeah, it was just kind of this like sort of funny thing. And then I remember the big hack happened, and it kind of flew out of my mind at that point. I was like, oh, it's too bad. It was kind of like this trust was broken, I think, with me a bit. So I kind
Mhm.
of stepped back. Um, and then I think while I was as an architect, I was kind of during my years of practice, I wasn't really clued too deeply into Web3 space or software in general, right?
Mhm.
For me, like, web development, for the longest time was all like, like jQuery and stuff. I had no idea about, like, all these frameworks that were kind of replacing it, and things, and so I was kind of, yeah, and I kind of fell behind, I think, a bit. And especially, yeah,
Mhm.
as it turned, when I kind of like lost my trust in the whole Bitcoin and crypto. But then eventually, like, I started to get really into, so this sort of fast forward into me working as a sort of staff engineer. And I was reading a lot of these books. This is a couple of years back. I was reading all these books about, it's called the data mesh. And that seemed like this really, really cool idea. And one of the key ideas behind that whole kind of architecture, that ethos, is this sort of decentralization proposition. And then I was like, oh, I know a bit about that. Like,
Mhm.
that sounds familiar. And so that was kind of like in the back of my head, and I was actually working on an implementation of a data mesh in a kind of biotechnical kind of company, and that was like a really, really cool thing. But it was always kind of like, how do you take this further, right? How do you take this sort of distributed system problem and kind of take it as far as it can possibly go?
Mhm.
Which I guess, yeah, that kind of led me to seeing, I think it was like a job posting on Edge and Node. And I remember I wasn't necessarily looking for work at the time, but I just saw basically like all of the boxes kind of got checked for me. And I remember just sort of being like, you know what, I'm just gonna let it all out on this thing. I'm just gonna sort of say, this is my thesis about, like, how I think about data and why I think, Edge and Node and the graph specifically too. I was working a lot of GraphQL, a lot of dynamic schema generations, and all these kinds of cool things that you
Mhm.
guys were doing. I was like, this is really well aligned. And then, so yeah, I kind of came in. This is my first sort of like proper Web3, uh, like job, or position where I'm like working technically in this space. But it was really cool because a lot of the stuff that I work on here, a lot of technologies I've been focusing on have been technologies I've been interested in looking, learning about, reading about, and sometimes even, you know, just involved with for the last like 5 years or so, which, data fusion, Arrow, and all these kinds of
Mhm.
technologies. And so it just seemed like it was like a really nice fit, for me, and it because it kind of scratched that, like, itch of like I want to do the next big thing, and then I also want
Hmm.
the next hardest thing. I honestly, it was what's the most difficult
Hmm.
problem for the next, and
That
then
sounds like a good growth mentality, especially coming
yeah,
from, started from, sounds like an artist kind of foundation into structure at the same time. And I feel like that type of persona is found here in
hmm
crypto and has been. I go to these events and I find these people similar to yourself that want to be able to create something new, something fresh, something also
yeah,
challenging.
yeah,
And that's, I'm really happy that you found your place here.
yeah,
The the next uh, thing, of course, that I want to get into, the title of actually this live stream is Building AMP
yeah,
with you, John Swanson. And I'll be the first to say you're not the only person building AMP, but one of the
no,
key people building it.
yeah.
What has that process been like from your perspective of, okay, you're now with Edge and Node. How did you get introduced to the concept of AMP, and what's that
Mhm.
been like since?
Yeah, so I was kind of introduced at a very high level, I'd say, because not much they could really talk about. It was actually in my interview, and we basically talked a lot about, around kind of not never directly like this is these components of AMP, but we talked about like what would eventually be like these are the core components of AMP, like the storage layer, the catalog, metadata layer, query execution layer, and kind of working all the way through those. And I remember in my head I was like, oh, this all sounds pretty cool, pretty interesting. And then yeah, so I started off first initially getting kind of wrapping my head around the actual technicalities of graph node,
Mhm.
and uh and then just diving full feet in into AMP. Yeah, I was working a lot with Leo specifically.
Mhm.
And so yeah, we hammered through basically like everything from the moment it leaves our kind of like the moment you kind of read from RPC or whatever your provider is, from the moment from
Mhm.
there. And then I'm like, okay, it's mine. Now what do we do with this? How do we structure this? How do we catalog this? How do we do it so that we can maximize performance? And then that's kind of been what I've always been focused on. um,
Mhm.
and then just sort of building out a lot of the kind of internal brain of AMP, specifically like the catalog, and how we how AMP knows where data lives within its system is kind of how you can think about it. And how do we make that, as accessible as possible to AMP, so that people that are
Nice.
querying with it, work fast. So yeah,
Can I,
yeah.
if I could interject here, just to before we keep on going in all these layers, because you're right now talking about various layers and various
Mhm.
technicalities. Let's take a step back for the audience who are getting introduced to the concept of
Sure.
AMP. How would you want someone who is maybe moderately technical, mildly technical, or even non-technical to understand AMP? Let's start with non-technical. Well, what is
Yeah.
AMP to someone who is non-technical?
Yeah, so I would say at the 10,000 foot level, I say AMP is a essentially a database for blockchain data, right? It provides an interface for someone to format and define a format for the data they care about that lives on a blockchain somewhere, and then it makes that data accessible to them in that format that they've defined. I think that's
Nice.
it. So like you can define a structure for your data. You can define what data you care about, and then it handles for you how you want to make that data accessible. So because it's a database, it speaks SQL, and
Now,
so
hold on. I'm
yeah,
gonna pause you right there. You went and said sequel, so you're going into
yeah,
technicality. You're jumping
yeah,
ahead, which I like. I
yeah.
like.
Sorry.
Now I'm gonna flip the question actually and say now I understand that it's a database. It allows you to define the shape of the data coming in. That makes sense.
Mhm.
Now feel free to be as technical as you want. How would you want to
Okay.
pitch AMP to someone who is
Yeah.
highly technical in the blockchain space?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, exactly. AMP provides a materialization and cataloging layer for blockchain data. So blockchains, I think David Lutter, who works here, once described it as like it's a like basically it's a write-ahead log with no catalog. So so it's basically it's a big flood of data, but you don't know what data is what. You just get everything. And so what this provides for some people is a catalog, so that they now know that now that they've materialized this data into files or into some sort of data abstraction layer, storage abstraction, I should say, layer, that they now know, oh, this is, this, X, Y, or Z lives in files A, B, or C, or, in these locations. So it's really boils down to a materialization tool to define schemas and materializing them so that you can produce streams or tables of data. I think that's not quite as technical as it can get, but we don't have forever.
Yeah, let me get out a whiteboard here and let's actually,
yeah,
no,
exactly. Yeah, and stuff. It's like, okay, so you start off with an arrow schema. Yeah, no.
The funny thing is, I've been in the AMP, formerly Nozzle world, going on many months now, and I'm at the edge of watching what the engineers at EdgeNode are doing. And understanding it has been an evolving process where this is a new concept. This is bleeding edge tech. And anytime there's a new concept and bleeding edge tech in such a already complicated field that is computer science, it's going to take time to understand and essentially understand the North Star of what any brand new technology is trying to do. I've been trying to summarize it. Maybe I'll try to pitch it back to you. Is basically we're trying to say, all right, well, what if Postgres could be reinvented today, understanding that it would be a blockchain first database?
Yeah,
that's kind of the way that I'm trying to pitch it to people in as short as possible way, where Postgres has become a de facto standard for so many sections and subsections of computer engineering and computer science. So it feels like this is a salute to that standardized, not necessarily standardized, but most widely accepted, one of the more widely accepted database archetypes out there. Curious on your takes on that. Does that feel like it tracks?
No, that feels like it tracks. And I feel like you're touching on something that I see as a broader kind of movement these last few years in the world of software engineering, and that is like this idea of like a bespoke database. So it's like a domain specific database, because Postgres, when it was created, it was created a long time ago. So it was created in a world with different constraints than we have today. So it was living in a land where everything was kind of, memory constrained and things like this. Although you can say RAM prices being what they are now, maybe we're becoming memory constrained again. But there's different constraints back then, and so it as a general purpose tool is really great. It can handle a lot, right? And I don't think anyone doubts that. However, there's a movement right now. It's like, no, but we have tools to build domain specific tools. If a tool to make a tool. And so what AMP is okay, let's not use the general purpose thing, right? And there's all these other databases now that are coming out that are providing domain specific tooling and a domain specific database for those domains. And now we have the very difficult domain of blockchain data and crypto and Web3, and now we're like, okay, let's provide that domain specific tool, right? That domain specific database, so that you don't have to rely on shoehorning or kind of jerry rigging, something like a general purpose tool like Postgres to do these things that we can say, hey, that applied expertise can solve for you. And so I think that's been really great, is working on something like AMP, is you have a lot of different people applying very specific expertise to solve this problem, where I don't necessarily have a lot of protocol or blockchain specific expertise. I do have a lot of the tools of the trade expertise of how to make databases and things like that. And so I think it's that's the kind of thing. And I think, yeah, you kind of nailed it. It's like, instead of using this general purpose thing, let's provide someone something that works really, really well. Now there's a caveat I'll say to this, and I think it's something that all of these very domain specific databases are, be it like Tiger Beetle or InfluxDB or any of these kinds of really bleeding edge technologies that are not necessarily competing with us because they're for different domains, but they are in a similar space as us as a domain specific technology, is they have to figure out a way, how do you integrate then into a system that assumes everything is kind of general purpose or plug and play, right? Because if you're going to be replacing Postgres, everything speaks Postgres out there, right? It's a very, everyone, there's so much good tooling around it. And so I think that's kind of that's what's on my mind is right now. We've talked about this, but it's sort of that challenge of, now you have this bespoke thing, right? But you want to be able to take it anywhere, like you could with the general purpose thing. And I think that's going to be the real trick. And we have a lot of people working on right now, both working on the AMP internals, as well as this AMP, connectivity. Like, what does it mean to run AMP, and what is it? What can you connect it to? Where are the pain points? These kinds of things.
I feel like it was a great design decision to say, how low in the data can we go to achieve the most opportunity for various materializations desired, and to then make deployment options horizontally and vertically scalable in a lot of different ways. And then, like, you're really aiming lower in the stack, which, I'm getting more familiar with it. I'm like, oh, that is crazy flexible. After working with subgraphs, which I love subgraphs, they're incredible. They have more determined, pre-chosen, opinionated parts of the stack that they're wonderful if that's what you want. If there's any variation therein, it becomes a little bit more difficult. I'd imagine as you're going through this and you're saying, okay, now we're at this lower level, that's great. And also, we have way more responsibility now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
for the variety of ways that this can be expressed.
Yes.
And I'm just curious, is there one thing that really connects with you about, like, oh crap, kind of emotion of how many different ways this can go?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, there's you kind of use the word opinionated, and I think that's it's a good terminology, because it's something that's higher up on the stack. You can be, right? You define that DSL, that domain specific language of interacting. But like we're doing is like you said, so low that we're below the opinions, right? Almost, right? Now people can be opinionated about how to access, or how to talk with, essentially, AMP. And I think, that is like an oh crap thing, because you end up being in this such a broad space where it is a bit of an oh crap, but it's also exciting because you can see someone be like, hey, I have this opinion now, and that actually is a really good idea, right? How do we then leverage those kinds of ideas? And I think it just opens it up, and especially working on something that is open sourced, is having that kind of open space, and having 10,000 feet above us for people to work and work with us, right? We're not just looking down. And I think that's I think a very exciting kind of thing to do. And I think it's something that like, even working with people, we have we're currently like 3 or 4 different ideas around how to connect AMP to something that's non-AMP. And I think that's something that's I think they're all very valid, and they all have very different use cases, and they're all very different. They all have different pros and cons, and it's something that's like in my experience, I've never had to really like compete, not necessarily compete, but like it's always been that higher level of like, no, we're using GraphQL. This is how you talk to it. These are your types. We're done, kind of a thing, right? And,
right.
And so it's nice because it's you can you yeah, there's a lot of
It
opinions.
reflects maturing. It
Yeah.
reflects maturing within an industry and also personally maturing as individuals in the space. Edge and Node and many of the core dev teams in the graph ecosystem have been building in this world since what, 2016? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
there's so much knowledge in the graph ecosystem. And with all the variables, it makes sense. We just got to step back so we could take in more perspective and provide essentially a better product, a better variation of the product, a better expression of the product. And you can't do that when you're face to face with the problem. You literally have to drop
Yeah.
back, or in this metaphor, go lower in the stack
Hmm.
to really even begin to approach all the different problems. So yeah, it shows a
Yeah.
maturing. It shows understanding more of a larger time scale
Hmm.
of what this will take to really find the nitty gritty growth opportunities that
Hmm.
this product will provide. I'm curious for you. Right now, AMP has been it was announced a few months ago. You're working on what I understand is more of the connections of AMP. Is
Yes.
that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct. Yes.
And and so tell me more about that, and what does that roadmap look for you like in the next, let's say, 6 months of the connections of AMP, and what do you see
Yeah.
coming forward in the future?
Yeah. So I'm working right now, yeah, on kind of like I said, like how do we make AMP something that can work with an existing technology stack, right? No single database, doesn't matter which, is kind of lives on its own, right? If you have I mean, you can, I guess, run a Postgres instance on your machine and manually enter stuff, right? Like, but there's always kind of like there's like a it has to live in a broader ecosystem, right? Of things that are
Yeah.
producing data, or providing data, things that are consuming data. And sometimes, and oftentimes, you have multiple databases that are all kind of serving different solutions in a particular, stack. Um, and usually the bottleneck of data engineering, generally speaking, is making it so that one data system can talk to another data system. So oftentimes you have these very elaborate, complex pipelines that are transforming data, that are basically moving data from A to B, right? That's kind of, at the end of the day,
Mhm.
it's really what it
In the
boils
end of
down
the
to.
day, I mean,
It's
data isolated and not connected is not very useful.
not very useful. And so you'll have these batteries of data engineers that are moving it around. Oh, you need it in Power BI? Okay, we'll pipeline that over to you. Oh, you need this in Snowflake? We'll get that over to you. And so that something that is oftentimes a bottleneck is the overhead of deploying, maintaining all these kinds of very hyper complex pipelines. And so there is technology out there, not to get too specific, but that we can basically, as much as we can, if people want, eliminate those kinds of pipelines and eh, make it so that AMP, as it is doing its AMP thing, right? It's producing, materializing all this blockchain data. It's ingesting, it's running queries, it's doing all these kinds of really cool things. It can then extend, as an extension, manage end-to-end a pipeline to Postgres, or manage end-to-end a
Hmm.
pipeline and it does all those kinds of transformations. Um, and I think that's like I think a very exciting thing. And it is all kind of built out of the foundational architecture of AMP, and the technology decisions that we've made here open us up to that kind of flexibility. And I've been working, yeah, in the month of January, basically, on seeing how far we can push that, right? Like, how far can we push latency down to a subscriber system, right, of an AMP
Mm.
database, or of an AMP, producer. And
Nice. And I
that's,
I
yeah,
heard you mention two things. You said Snowflake, Power BI.
yeah.
Um, what can you speak more to that, or is that something that right now you're still working on? How's that feel?
Yeah, Yeah, so I don't know how much I can speak about because we're going to be, I think,
Okay,
releasing this more in a broader sense, but
cool.
I think it's yeah. So this idea of of a unified connector, so
Mm,
it basically takes the internal format of data within AMP, right? So as when AMP
okay.
itself is querying data, right, or you're running a query, or you're materializing data from a blockchain or from your data set that you've defined. Um, that internally has a structure, right? Those live in data structures within AMP. And so those data structures are extremely flexible, though. And there's a lot of technology built around those, like a whole ecosystem around this technology or these data structures. And it would be essentially leveraging those structures to in a way that doesn't restructure data until it absolutely needs to, or if it does it at the last moment. It does it everything lazily, and it just pumps everything into that destination. So if you have
Mm,
these kind of external data systems to AMP, um, yeah, so it kind of streamlines an otherwise process that you would have to, establish a pipeline for maybe, or host additional um, host just additional you know architecture that would have to
right.
maintain and everything.
Yeah.
It would be great, like, hey, I just take everything from this data set and I want to see it over here. I think it should be
Hmm.
declarative,
Right.
and I think that AMP has internally these kinds of things. And so what's really great is that, like I kind of mentioned, this ecosystem around these data structures. Um,
Hmm.
it's a really hot thing right now in the data engineering world, I suppose, is leveraging these very kind of shared data structures. And so it's like saying, hey, my system, like for example, Snowflake, um, underlying a lot of Snowflake, when you're ingesting into Snowflake, or if you're doing analytical data engineering with Snowflake, it's writing to Parquet. That's
Hmm.
the data layer oftentimes, right? Like you can do other things with it, but oftentimes that's kind of the underlying storage uh, uh, format. And well, good thing is so does AMP, right? AMP has Parquet
Hmm.
kind of at the bottom of its stack, and so that means we have already in AMP a thing that speaks Parquet. Well, if we speak Parquet, Snowflake speaks Parquet. There is
Hmm.
existing things that say, oh, we can just pipe this over to Parquet or over to Snowflake land and let it do its management.
Right.
And we don't have to double the work anywhere, right? We don't have to load this
Right.
into Python, transform it, rewrite it to a buffer, and then send it down. It's
Yeah.
We can just kind of fire it on over. And so
And
I think,
you've
yeah,
been living in this space, like you said, for a while now, in this connectors, and I'm trying to get a takeaway here, and that you're saying if we there could be something more universal in terms of being able to connect and have that pre-processing done in real. It's a hospitable way of dealing with data, saying we've done the
yeah,
work,
yeah,
we've rolled out the red carpet, we've found a way to make it as easy as possible. That's kind of what I'm understanding.
yeah,
Am I on
yeah.
track with that, John?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Awesome.
it's kind of like a true database connectivity. Um, if we want to, and so I think it's kind of meeting users where they already are, right? So it's something that I'm always kind of uh, maybe sensitive to a little bit because I am coming from kind of Web 2 land initially,
Mm.
and uh, and one of the big problems is you'll work with these kind of data platforms, these really big institutional SaaS platforms that are just such a closed off kind of, yeah, it's really tough to get anything in or out, and which they have their reasons for, but it's there's a lot of sort of brain damage applied to work around these kinds of things. And I think
Hmm.
AMP becomes a better tool if we are able to meet people where they already are, and then we can bring them into the Web3 land. Because like, oh, guess what? You know SQL. Well, good for you. You now know what you need to know to get into Web3, right? Like, I think it's like
Yeah,
if you're a
I
data engineer, that's awesome.
yeah, it is. I asked Leo, he was on here, I think about 3 weeks ago, if there's one takeaway that you want people to know about AMP, what is it? And he goes, SQL.
Yeah,
That was it.
I think
So
so. Yeah.
it is an important thing for him, and there's many important things, but to connect to what you are describing, the ability to find something that is approachable is valuable as gold
Hmm.
in this world right now because the tech being so difficult and so
Yeah.
confusing is just part. It's like people think that's just part of it, and many times it is because it's
Hmm.
freaking hard.
Hmm.
Those little moments that an engineer such as yourself and other team members at Edge Node are clearly putting the effort in is to make it approachable.
Yeah.
And for bleeding edge tech, that is, I'm sure, really, really, really nice. Where it's
Yeah.
already confusing in this space, just go ahead and make
Yeah.
it a little bit more approachable.
A
Yeah,
little more pressure. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, yeah, I think,
yeah,
and it's really cool to see this kind of happening with something like blockchain, which has been, like it's kind of like a cliche, but like the trope of having to try to explain it to somebody, right, that doesn't understand it or hasn't been in it in the space. And it's
yeah,
it's it's like, okay, well, yeah, it's going to turn people off. And you can talk about it with like any kind of extremely complex system. Like what is an LLM? Oh, like all these black boxes out there of like bleeding edge technology. And I think what
yeah.
the key is if you want to empower people, it's to say, okay, this might be a black box. Maybe you don't need to know the internals, but I'm going to shed light on it. I'm going to turn the lights in the room on so you can see it. And I'm going to show you, make this as easy of a black box to interact with so that
Right.
when it's time for you to like open the lid and see what's inside, you have at least an understanding of what its functionality is and what you can do with
Mm,
it. And I think that's such like a good foundation. And I think, yeah, like SQL is that sort of shared language that I think is, never would I have guessed that would be like the bridge between Web 2 and Web 3. But it is kind of like yeah, it's like we have to be speaking the same language with each other. Um,
yeah.
Otherwise you get
The
tower.
funny thing
Yeah.
about oh sorry, go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, otherwise it's, Tower of Babel and everyone's screaming at each other and no one understands anything.
It's I heard a this is a hot take from maybe 6 months ago. Composability is not worth building towards because the technology that has proven itself is already relatively composable, and you're really making the effort to not build something new that's composable. It's just take something that's already been built that's composable, and then from there iterate as best as you possibly can. It's not like build new things to plug in. It's like
Yeah.
I'm trying to find the phrasing
Yeah.
right, but it's like the whole argument and the whole thesis of Web three. I'm definitely butchering that, but essentially Web three was all about build the newest, weirdest stuff that happens to be composable,
Hmm.
and the argument was flip that on its head. Start with composability that's been proven, and then build out from there. And that's what
Yeah.
AMP feels like, where you're starting with composability from baked in from the
Yeah.
lowest of level, and then getting very creative.
Yeah. Yeah. I think yeah, like starting with, this is something that's important, even with, non-software things like an architecture, for example, you need to have your program prior to execution, right? So you need to be able to compose, like you're sort of talking about, what it is that you're sort of doing. Like you're kind of wrapping around, you're creating a model basically of what to build. And I think that is something that needs to happen in the front. Otherwise, you're going to be kind of chasing your tail all the time, being like, "Oh, I need to do this. All right, now I have to work backwards here." But it's like a critical thing of kind of, yeah, working back, taking a step back, starting with the model, starting with what you're saying, like composition, and then building on top of that. I think, yeah, absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense. And in terms of like not using just existing things, it's like, well, I mean, a lot of the most interesting stuff out there, is built on with existing things. You know what I mean? Like, but
I mean,
it's
that's art. I mean, we're getting back to art, where
yeah,
a
right.
lot of
Like,
times the best art is not new things. It's taking stuff that we already know and doing
no,
something that's
yeah,
never been done.
never been
Yeah.
done. Yeah, exactly. And I think though it's like the
Oh.
idea around yeah, but like, sometimes it is time to kind of like, in the case of AMP, kind of think of it as like a new medium
Mm.
of, like, yeah, you can, abuse Postgres or something like that to do these kinds of things. You can abuse these other technologies, but ask yourself the questions like what would it look like if none of that was happening? It was just the thing that you're trying to make, right? Not the facsimile
Hmm.
of a thing that you've kind of molded into it. And I think it's a really
Right.
interesting kind of exercise in general. I think it's like a general software exercise, right? Like, if when it what would it look like if you vendored your own dependencies, to use really technical
Great
speak.
phrasing. No, that,
Yeah,
that
and
that makes perfect sense. It's
yeah,
confidence begets confidence. It's
exactly. And
yeah, that's great.
yeah, and I think, yeah, that's kind of for me, is always been in my head, my ethos, right? Like, do I use something that's, off the shelf? When is it, well, I can learn a lot more if I don't. But there's also, pros and cons. But
Sure.
it's I don't know. I think it is something that you kind of should ask yourself as a software engineer or as a creative or as anybody, is, when is it time to, yeah, like, kind of change medium or something, essentially.
Hmm.
When is it time to invent it here? When is it time
Right.
that I need to do these kinds of things? And you'll find that it is a lot more freeing, I think, than it is, shackling you to either, implementation or complexity or something.
Yeah. Yep. Brilliant on that. I agree wholeheartedly. The next few months for AMP, I'm excited for, and I hear the excitement
Mhm.
in your voice. If there's anything that you would like engineers to take away from this in terms of understanding AMP, specifically you talking to engineers out there, what would you like them to know about AMP?
Yeah, the thing I would like them to know about AMP is is that it will work with your system. I think that's it
Ooh.
fits in as a system of its own in its own right, and I think it is a very powerful system. But I want engineers to also know that it plays well with others. And I want engineers to know that that is a kind of guiding ethos internally at EduNode as we're sort of developing this stuff in the open, and is that we want it to play well with others, right? We're doing our best, and I think that is something that I hope that engineers can understand, that means higher performance. That means, better throughput, lower latencies, all those kinds of fun stuff, and it also means less headaches, for them. And I think that is, for me right now is my guiding light, and I think that's something I want everyone to know.
Awesome. Awesome. Well,
Yeah,
John, thank you so much for your time. This has
right on.
been a great office hours. I
Yes,
hope you are doing very well with your maintenance of your energy, making sure you
yeah,
can continue pushing as you've been doing.
yeah,
And yeah, that was really great. So,
yeah. It's
everyone,
great to chat.
for hopping in, thank you so much for coming through. And John, thank you so
Yeah,
much for your time.
yeah. Thank you. It
Uh,
was great to chat.
and yeah, it was great chatting. And everyone, I'll be here next week. We'll be chatting more about AMP. And if you haven't tried it already, go to the EduNode repository/AMP and go ahead and tinker around. It is open source.
Yeah. All right.
All
Bye.
right. All right. See you guys. Take care.
See ya.